Learn English through story. Whispers in the shadows. The town of Cresswell was an old place, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests that stretched out like dark fingers toward the horizon. Time seemed to move slower there, and the town itself felt caught between centuries, with cobblestone streets, dimly lit alleys, and houses that bore the weight of generations. There were secrets buried in those streets, whispers carried by the wind that danced between the houses, touching only the ears of those who knew how to listen. Lena was one of those people. A woman in her early 30s, she had returned to Cresswell after a decade in the city, drawn back by the death of her mother and the weight of familial obligation. Her mother had always warned her about the town's shadows, the quiet undercurrents of mystery that flowed through it. But Lena had dismissed those warnings as old-world superstition, something her mother clung to out of fear and tradition. Now, standing in her childhood home, with its creaky floorboards and heavy silence, Lena couldn't help but feel the pull of something darker beneath the surface of Cresswell's quiet streets. The house itself was a large, decaying structure at the edge of the woods. It had been in Lena's family for generations, passed down from one to the next, each adding their own secrets to its walls. Her mother's passing had left Lena the sole heir, and though she had no real desire to stay, something about the house, and the town itself, felt like it had claimed her the moment she returned. As the days passed, Lena settled into a routine, but she couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered in the air. There were moments when she could swear she heard voices in the house, soft whispers that seemed to echo in the walls. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans of an old home settling into the night. These whispers were different, urgent, almost as if some engliah or something else was trying to communicate with her. One evening, after a particularly long day of sorting through her mother's belongings, Lena found herself standing in the attic, a place she had always avoided as a child. The attic had an unsettling energy, filled with old trunks, dust-covered furniture, and relics from her family's past. But tonight, something called her there. It was an instinct, a pull she couldn't ignore. In the far corner of the attic, buried under old quilts, Lena found a small, wooden box. It was carved with intricate designs, symbols that looked vaguely familiar but foreign at the same time. She ran her fingers over the lid, feeling the grooves of the carvings, and then, with a deep breath, she opened it. Inside was a single letter, yellowed with age, addressed to her mother in a handwriting Lena didn't recognize. The ink was smudged in places, but the words were clear enough. Underscore to my beloved Celia, there are things you do not yet understand about this town, things hidden in the shadows that we, as your family, have long been tasked to protect. The whispers you hear are real, and they will guide you if you let them. But beware, for the shadows have a way of twisting truths. Do not trust what you see in the dark. Underscore. Lena stared at the letter, her heart racing. The idea that her mother had been involved in something so secretive, so strange, was unsettling. She had always known her mother as a cautious, practical woman, not one to indulge in the supernatural. But this letter hinted at something deeper, something Lena had never imagined. That night, the whispers grew louder. At first, Lena thought she was imagining it. The soft murmurs began just as she was drifting off to sleep, faint like the wind rustling through leaves. But as the minutes passed, they became clearer, as though someone was standing at the foot of her bed, speaking just loud enough for her to hear but not understand. Lena sat up, her heart pounding in her chest, scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. But there was nothing, only the heavy darkness pressing in around her. Sleep was elusive after that, and the next morning Lena was left with a sense of dread that clung to her like a shadow. She couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. There was something in the house, or perhaps something in the town, that was trying to reach her. She needed answers. Lena went to the town's library, an old, musty building that looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The librarian, Mrs. Wainwright, had been there for as long as Lena could remember. A stooped, elderly woman with sharp eyes and a mind that seemed far sharper than her frail appearance suggested. Mrs. Wainwright had always been a source of knowledge for those willing to listen. "What can I help you with, dear?" Mrs. Wainwright asked as Lena approached the counter. "I'm looking for information about my family," Lena said, hesitating. "Specifically, about the house and a broken bar. Anything strange that might have happened there." Mrs. Wainwright's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition passing through her eyes. "Your family, the Turners, have always been a broken bar special to this town," she said slowly, as though weighing her words. "There are stories, old stories, about the house, but they're just that, stories." Lena leaned forward. "I found a letter from my mother. It mentions something about the shadows and whispers. I need to know what it means." Mrs. Wainwright sighed, her eyes softening with something that looked like pity. "The shadows in this town are not like other places. They carry with them the weight of the past, secrets that many have tried to forget. Your family are broken bar. They've been tied to those shadows for generations." Lena frowned. "Tied? How?" Mrs. Wainwright hesitated again, then lowered her voice. "The Turners have always been the keepers of the town's oldest secret. It's said that the shadows here are alive, that they whisper truths and lies alike. But only your family has been able to hear them clearly. Your mother a broken bar. She tried to protect you from it, I imagine. But now that she's gone, the whispers have come for you." The weight of Mrs. Wainwright's words settled over Lena like a heavy cloak. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that the strange occurrences in her home were anything more than her imagination. But deep down, she knew the truth. The whispers were real, and they had been waiting for her. That night, Lena returned to the house, her mind racing with what Mrs. Wainwright had told her. She wandered through the dark halls, the shadows stretching out before her like living things. The whispers had returned, louder now, more insistent. They swirled around her, just out of reach, and Lena found herself drawn toward the attic once more. When she entered the attic, the air was thick with the weight of the past. The wooden box she had found earlier seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, beckoning her closer. Lena knelt before it, her heart pounding as she lifted the lid again. This time, the contents had changed. Inside the box was a small, black mirror. Its surface was smooth and cold to the touch, reflecting nothing but darkness. As Lena held it in her hands, the whispers intensified, surrounding her in a cacophony of voices. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but the urgency was unmistakable. Without thinking, Lena raised the mirror to her face, peering into its depths. For a moment, there was nothing, just the dark, empty reflection of the attic behind her. But then, slowly, shapes began to form in the glass. Shadows twisted and coiled, forming images of peoply figures Lena recognized, her mother, her grandparents, and other members of her family long gone. They stood in the shadows, their faces solemn, their eyes fixed on her. One by one, they began to speak, their voices melding with the whispers around her. We are the keepers of the shadows, they said, their voices echoing in unison. We have protected this town from the darkness that lies within it, but now it is your turn. You must choose, Lena. Embrace the shadows, or let them consume you. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be a part of whatever ancient duty her family had carried. But now, standing in the attic, with the weight of generations pressing down on her, she realized she had no choice. The shadows had already claimed her, long before she had ever returned to Cresswell. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if urging her to make a decision. Lena closed her eyes, her mind racing. She could walk away, leave the house, leave the town, and never look back. But deep down, she knew that it would never truly free her. The shadows would follow her, just as they had followed her family for centuries. Taking a deep breath, Lena opened her eyes and looked into the mirror once more. The figures in the glass were still there, waiting. Slowly, she nodded, her decision made. I will protect the town, she whispered. The figures in the mirror faded, leaving only her reflection staring back at her. The whispers quieted, the shadows in the room retreating, as though satisfied with her answer. Lena stood, the mirror still in her hands, and for the first time since returning to Cresswell, she felt a sense of clarity. The shadows were not her enemy. They were a part of her, a part of her family, and now, a part of her life. Lena had accepted her role as their keeper, and in doing so, had finally found her place in the town that had always called to her. As the moonlight filtered through the attic windows, casting long shadows across the floor, Lena knew one thing for certain, the whispers would never stop, but now she was ready to listen. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.